players gather to cast powerful spells. Some of the oldest and most powerful in the history of Magic the Gathering. Balustrade Spy, Dread Return, Thassa's Oracle, and many others. Battling head-to-head in brutal combat, they all have one thing in common: to uphold their legacy and the search for eternal glory.
The Eternal Glory podcast is brought to you by the minds behind Bosch & Roll on YouTube, Arabian University, and theepicstorm.com. This episode is sponsored by Moxfield and financial advisor and certified financial planner Nicholas Robb.
Hello, and welcome to episode 156 of the Eternal Glory podcast, Edge of Eternities in Eternal Formats. We've already recorded 30 minutes of introduction and banter for the week, available in our supporter exclusive free show. Check out patreon.com/eternalglory to gain access, or join as a YouTube member for the same content on YouTube instead. As always, I'm Phil Gallagher, aka Thraben U.
I'm Brian Coval, aka Bosch & Roll.
And I'm Bryant Cook of The Epic Storm.
Shout out to all our new Patreon and YouTube members since the last episode. We've got C. Hall, Jack S., Nathan B., Austin W., Throwaway, WBA Snowman, Dotline, and Ferns the Fern. A lot of people came in since the last episode. Shout out to all of you. They will enjoy this week's pre-show and figure out who was firing it out of both ends recently.
To win in Magic, adjust strategy as the game changes. The same is true of investments. Nicholas Robb, financial advisor and certified financial planner, can help you create a game plan for your financial goals. Call 314-377-9524 or email nicholas.ropp@edwardjones.com. That's nicholas.raupp@edwardjones.com to get started today. Edward Jones, member SIPC.
And if you're interested in advertising to 10,000 plus Eternal gamers every episode, reach out. We're always accepting new sponsors.
All right, so to kick off this episode, which is largely going to focus on Edge of Eternities, we are going to do a little bit of a quick metagame check-in, as I think that's important to do, as we do not have very many days of Edge of Eternities being on Magic Online or available in paper. So this is going to be kind of some early information. So let's start with where our metagame is at now.
Well, it's Reanimator. That's the story of the metagame, and this is not a ban episode. Like, we all know how we felt about Reanimator going into the last ban update. We've covered that exclusively, yada yada. Now here we are. What is the actual state of Reanimator now that we've been here?
So part of this depends on where you're getting your data from. If you look at MTG Goldfish, which often gives you the most realistic picture of what people are just physically submitting, we've got 16.5% of the online metagame as Dimir Reanimator. And if you look at MTG Top 8 instead, it is 21% of the metagame.
Right, so MTG Top 8 only reports Top 8s. That's their thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and on Goldfish, if you click into any given deck, I see 2 3s and 0 4s in here among the Top 8s, which are also many. So that might be where we get some of those numbers changing.
And it's not surprising that those numbers would be different. Reanimator is unsurprisingly performing really, really well. 4 of the top 8 in the Legacy Showcase Challenge were Dimir Reanimator. The August 3rd Challenge also featured 4 copies in the top 8 at 5 copies. 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 5th, and 8th place.
And I was at the Buffalo Chicken Dip events in Columbus, Ohio last weekend, where back-to-back 100-person tournaments. Saturday was a little over 100. Sunday was just under. It was in the 90s. Both of those events were won by Dimir Reanimator.
It's a few weeks ago, but if you look at the 720 challenge as well, Reanimator was 1st through 5th. It was 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. So the deck is certainly doing well.
More generally, the blue-black shell is doing well in Legacy. Dimir Tempo is relatively popular. If we look at Goldfish's numbers, It's about 5% of the format, which puts it at about the 5th most played deck. And if you look at MTG Top 8, it's 6%, which means it's the 3rd most played deck by those standards.
So I will nitpick a little bit here. So we have 16.5% for Dimir Reanimator according to MTG Goldfish. That's over the last 7 days. If you expand it to 14 or 30, it actually goes up to 19%. And if you look at Dimir Tempo over the last 7 days, it's the 3rd most popular deck at 6.6%, with Mystic Forge combo, which we're going to talk about a little bit, being the 2nd most popular deck at 8.6. I think as Forge rises, so does Dimir Tempo, because Dimir Tempo is this highly interactive deck that sort of keeps Mystic Forge in check, and it tries to keep Dimir Reanimator in check. I think it does a pretty good job, but obviously Dimir Reanimator is very, very good. So I think Dimir Tempo is sort of the police of the format right now.
Yeah, as usual, and a lot of people won't like hearing this because there are strong opinions out there about the Brainstorm, Ponder, Wasteland, Daze, Force of Will core. Like it's an eye roll that it's always at the top of the format. But guess what? It's the good guy. It always is. Sometimes there's a broken Psychic Frog or Ragavan that sneaks into the shell and then it becomes a bad guy. But short of the deck being actually bannably broken, it's always the good guy that keeps the real nonsense in check. And we're seeing that now, except that the nonsense is not in check because Dimir Tempo is number 3 behind 2 combo decks.
I don't remember what I was looking at, but some data that I looked at from earlier today was showing it at a 57% win percentage in whatever event that data was coming from. It is doing really, really well.
For sure.
I have been just so very impressed by Tamiyo in particular out of all of these blue-black decks. We have talked about Tamiyo on the podcast a handful of times, but I think more and more and more, I am increasingly respecting that card and am very, very scared of its potential.
Yeah, I played Dimir Tempo at the Buffalo Chicken Dip events. I made a top 16 and a top 8 in those 2 events. And in the one where I made top 16, both of my Swiss losses were tight 3-game sets to Reanimator. And in the second one, I was eliminated from top 8 by Mystic Forge combo in a tight 3-game set. So there's your metagame snapshot. My Dimir Tempo being bumped out by Forge and Reanimator. The games were almost all about Tamiyo. It was even the Reanimator matchups where just Tamiyo Brainstorm ++ off we go is just such a boot on the neck of trying to do anything else. And that just ticks up. And you can't play white removal in the format right now. Like Prismatic Ending is just embarrassing. Leyline Binding. Remember when those were format staples? Those are clean answers to Tamiyo that you just don't really get to play with right now because of the shells that you need to respect and the other things that are going on. And again, not a ban episode, but if we get one card banned out of Legacy on the next cycle, I think Tamiyo is the grossest thing going on right now, causing the most warping and the worst games in the format.
Brian, you asked the question, what can we do about Dimir Reanimator? And there's a lot of different ways you can try to attack it, but something I've been trying to tell my coaching clients is sneak in main deck graveyard hate. So make it versatile, though, is the big thing. So I did a tutoring session with somebody on Cephalid Breakfast recently, and they were talking about playing Ghost Vacuum in the main deck. So to me, that's a little odd because it's not applicable across the entire format. And I said, well, if you're interested in playing Ghost Vacuum, why not a main deck Soul Guide Lantern? At least this way, at the bare minimum, you can turn your Urza Saga into a new card by drawing a card. And those are the sort of effects that I like to see in the main deck. There's another coaching client I have that plays Ad Nauseam Tendrils, where they play Beseech the Mirror, and they've been playing Mishra's Baubles, and I was like, well, what if we change those Baubles into Nile Spell Bombs? And that way, if you want to beseech them away, you could still pay a black and draw a card. Or you could sacrifice and just cantrip later. Those sort of minor upgrades, I think, actually get you a lot further than people would suspect.
Yeah, and there's a lot of main deck graveyard hate kicking around right now, especially if we look at those top decks that we were just talking about. The Dimir Reanimator itself, there's a few flex slots in there. The shell is mostly solved, but there's probably 5 to 7 slots you can move around. And I've seen a lot of Nile Spellbomb, Dothy, Voidwalker, and Cling to Dust in those main decks. And if they're not in the main decks, they're in the sideboards. They're choosing to use their flex slots to solve the mirror because that is the biggest target. If we move down the metagame, like I'm looking at MTG Goldfish last 7 days, we've got, I don't think this is actually updating, but I'll just name some decks. Red Stompy has been near the top of the metagame for a while. They've got Soul Guide Lantern in their main deck because now they're in Urza's Saga deck because of the rules change. Mystic Forge combo has Kozilek's Command. Demir Tempo main deck's a bunch of Nile Spellbombs. I had 3 in my list this past weekend, all in the main deck. Lands has Crop Rotation for Paducah Bog. They've got Urza's Saga package of their own. These decks, all of these top decks, have something in common, which is they are all respecting the graveyard at least a little bit.
And the graveyard hate is often less dead than you might expect it would be. So let's take a deck that doesn't really use the graveyard. Moonstompy is a great example. Even that has something like Pyrogoyf that does care about the graveyard to at least a small extent, right? So if you end up cycling a Spellbomb, that might end up shrinking that effect, which is relevant when it starts being copied by Fables or like you're on very tight margins versus a Broadside.
Yep, I even had a match this past weekend where my opponent was bodying me with a Barrowgoyf, and I was able to block with my Nethergoyf, which was slightly smaller than their Barrowgoyf, and then Spellbomb myself, removing unique card types from the graveyard to kill their Barrowgoyf, which, I mean, that's not what it's for, but someone cares a little bit about their graveyard somewhere. There's Murktide Regents, there's Dragon's Rage Channelers, there's stuff that cares about the graveyard, even when that's not the only thing going on.
There is sort of this frustrating dance that happens, though, when you are playing Spellbomb in particular, of do I clear out the graveyard to keep the Murktide Regent from coming, or do I have to save this to respect Reanimator? And a lot of times in game 1, you don't know whether you're playing against Tempo or Reanimator until it's too late, and you don't know like how many flex slot Murktides your opponent is going to have. And I have been gotten while having Spellbomb in play by graveyard stuff multiple times.
Yep, for sure. And the Reanimator decks, like you said, playing both Murktide and Entomb Reanimate, even if you know that they're Reanimator, even if you've seen their list, if you get to read the deck list, you still have to manage what if they have Murktide in hand versus what if they have Entomb Reanimate in hand with that same piece of graveyard hate.
So I'm just browsing Goldfish looking for recent technology while we talk, and there's a couple recent 5.0s from Doomsday. I was just looking to see if they were playing any Edge of Eternities cards, and there's a couple lists, like playing the new dragon that you, I forget the name of it, the new evoke ability.
It's Warp, and this card is in our show notes for later, I promise.
Okay. But there's also, I noticed some people sideboarding in 4 Tameo after people board out all of their hate, which is kind of clever. Like your opponent boards out all the removal and you're just like, okay, I'm the Tameo deck now. I'm just going to draw half my deck and play Oracle that way. It's pretty clever. Yep.
They were doing that in the Frog era as well. The great joke for the Magic Boomers calling the deck DDFT, Doomsday Frog Tameo, when it used to be Doomsday Fetchland Tendrils. That's a joke for people who were playing Magic before Thassa's Oracle was printed. That's how that deck used to have to win.
So beyond just main decking some graveyard hate, because that's absolutely where we are as a format, what else would you all be doing to attack the format right now?
Main deck disruption backed by a fast clock. The decks that are succeeding kind of fall into 3 buckets. We covered one already, which is main deck graveyard hate. The next one that we're going to talk about is main deck disruption backed by a fast clock. And the last one is ignore it, which we will talk about next. But main deck disruption backed by a fast clock. We mentioned Red Stompy having an Urza's Saga package, so they get stuff like Soul Guide Lantern now. They also just have Chalice of the Void, and they can kill you if you stumble at all. They can Blood Moon you, and Reanimator does have 2 basics, but if they're on the draw, that might not matter. And then the other deck that's showing up here is the Is It Corey Steel deck. That deck is getting it done, putting up numbers with just Force of Wills, Dazes. Most lists have 1 or 2 stifles in them. Just like clipping that Archon trigger on the way in, unholy heating it, and getting the last few points across is close enough. Stifling an Animate Dead trigger, even just stifling their first fetch land. The mana in Reanimator is not actually great if you can attack it. They don't need a lot to win, but they do need something. So if you're stifling fetches while having days and attacking for real numbers, that can get it done as well. once again, Delver being the good guy.
And the format is not used to red burn going at face. Prior to the last couple of weeks, that was something we hadn't seen in a while. So just straight up getting attacked by a bunch of Corey Steelcutter tokens and then bolt, you're dead. Ends game so quickly, and you have to respect it.
Or reanimate Atraxa, go down to 6 in response to the Atraxa trigger, bolt you twice, scoreboard. Yeah, Lightning Bolt is a card that is one of the greatest and most iconic Magic cards ever. Used to be a legacy staple. Dimir has pushed Izzet off the stage for over a year now, year and a half, almost 2 years. But Lightning Bolt is back if you want to be doing that. And when I've gotten the chance to play that card on the channel lately, it's been so impressive. I would personally build Izzet Delver, or Izzet Corey Steel, whatever we're calling it, with the 5th bolt in the form of Chain Lightning. There's a couple flex slots for Unholy Heats or whatever you want to do with those. I like the 5th ability to go face more than the ability to kill something bigger.
I understand why people would want to play Stifle right now, like the Atraxa trigger just being such a huge thing. That said, I do think there's some deck building restrictions in there, or maybe flaws, the better word, with Corey Steelcutter. You're playing a card that does not trigger your Corey Steelcutter, and you're forced to leave open mana when you want to be tapping out, just like creating those monk tokens. I just feel like it's a little bit of a nombo. Also, like, doesn't trigger Dragon's Rage Channeler. I've seen different builds of this deck. The build that I see right now on MTG Goldfish isn't actually playing Delver Secrets, but I've seen Delver Secrets and Mishra's Bauble and Corey Steelcutter plus other creatures, and I do wonder about the number of non-instant or sorceries you're actually allowed to play.
Yeah, I think Delver is pretty bad in the deck. And yeah, Stifle is definitely a concession to what else is going on in the format. I think if the top deck wasn't based on 2 creatures with powerful ETB abilities, we would not be playing that. That could even just be 2 more Chain Lightnings, go straight to the dome, who cares?
So, Brian, you mentioned ignoring it, which is my personal favorite way to deal with all of the bad stuff happening in Legacy. So decks like Oops, Cephalid Breakfast, Mystic Forge, recently the second most popular deck, and then Doomsday Show and Tell, and then, Classic Storm combo. I was doing some research over the weekend, and I noticed that a newer build of Oops All Spells is doing incredibly well. I don't know who came up with it, but the user that I would give credit to is Dash Caps. Dash is their username. And they're playing nothing but Oops All Spells and 5-owling almost every day. So what they've done is they've cut all of the cuteness from the deck. So they're not playing Memory's Journey, they're not playing Reanimate, there's no cool one-ofs outside of like Cabal Therapy to flashback once you've won to check for, Force of Will or Force of Negation or whatever. So when you look at the deck, it's playing 4 Thoughtseize, 4 Pact of Negation, the Cabal Therapy, and then 4 copies of Duress. So instead of allowing your opponent the time to set up their Graveyard Hate or whatever, this list is just better at turn 1 protection plus win. And then when you go to the sideboard games, they just board out of Oops, and now they're boarding into Black Belcher. So they have 4 Beseech the Mirror, 4 Goblin Charbelcher, Lion's Eye Diamonds, Chrome Moxes, and then there's a more recent list by C.D. Newton that is playing 1 Empty the Warrens as well. So that way, if your opponent has like Needle on Goblin Charbelcher, you can just go, okay, I'll be Storm, Beseech, Empty for 16, go. And this list has been doing very well. I played a couple leagues Monday night and I paired into it 3 times. I was just like, you got to be kidding me, like the 3rd Oops deck in a row. But people notice these innovations pretty quickly and then adapt. And this was one where I was like, oh, so you just cut all of the like cutesy stuff. There's no 61st card. Like you're just murdering people now. And when you're playing online, people notice when you're 61. They're like, oh, the opponent's playing 61 cards, huh? What are the odds that they're Oops? It's usually pretty high, and going down to 60, you take away that game.
Yeah, also that game doesn't work in paper. I'm just pointing that out. You can technically ask how many cards are in your opponent's deck, but sitting down, that would actually be so savage. I might consider getting in the habit of sitting down and like, I'll be on the play. How many cards are in your deck? I don't know. If Oops players are giving me that, I'll take it.
So I guess I have a question. And I'm not a judge, so I don't know this off the top of my head. If your opponent lies, what happens? Like, what if they're like, oh, I'm 60, but they're really 61?
Well, first of all, they would have to be caught in the lie. So you'd have to be like, let me verify and let me see you count it, which you'd have to be really savage to know that that is something you need to pursue. But that is cheating. That is publicly available information, which you are not allowed to lie about. My Delver of Secrets is a 6/6. You can't just say that shit.
So let's talk about Mystic Forge combo a little bit and how they're ignoring it. Because I think Forge is one of those stories where why is it making this like all of a sudden great comeback when we thought that it was dead a few months ago? Because like it hasn't really gained a whole lot. It has gained one card we'll talk about a little bit later. But when you look at the deck, it's still the Glaring Fleshraker core with the One Ring Mystic Forge, Karn the Great Piece of Trash. Recently it's gained Ugin Eye of the Storms, which is pretty cool. And then it has the Kozilek's Command, which is this modal perfect for everything card. It answers Collector Oof. It removes the graveyard against Dimir Reanimator. It digs you for your combo pieces like the One Ring, or it can just kill your opponent with Glaring Fleshraker. This card is the glue. But when you're looking at the rest of the deck, it really hasn't changed a whole lot. Like, they're playing a main deck Soul Guide Lantern now for their Urza Saga, but I'm not seeing a ton of difference here. So is it the fact that the community's figured out the list, or like I truly do not know why all of a sudden this deck went from a month ago we thought it wasn't very good anymore to the second most played deck?
I mean, it's Tezzeret, like that in the past week or so, at least, that is the answer. It has been putting up results in challenges with 2 to 4 copies of it, and it ends up increasing the threat density quite a bit while simultaneously giving you a new non-artifact angle of attack and giving you more ways to untap the One Ring.
Yeah, that is part of it in the recent days. I think there's also just the fundamental strength versus Reanimator that this deck has, because Reanimator is built like a combo deck these days. The tempo Reanimator with the Grief or the Troll of Khazad-dûm or the Frog, that is gone. Now they have Reanimate you or flip Tamiyo and get to work doing that and kind of protect the queen on Tamiyo. And Mystic Forge combo can bully both of those plans. The Kozilek's Command, of course, I genuinely think Kozilek's Command is the worst designed card in 10 years. Like, I don't think it's bannable, but I don't think it should ever exist. And it's so preposterous every time I read it. I'm like, how is this okay? But yeah, Kozilek's Command, of course, the glue of the deck that gives them play versus the Reanimator side. And if they have up 3 mana, which is not hard, if they just go like Ancient Tomb, Grim Monolith, pass, Reanimator can't really send into that without protection. They have to respect it. And if they don't send into that, they're going to get hit with a One Ring. Now Archon doesn't even trigger if it comes in. By the time they have a window to do anything, the opponent's drawn 7 extra cards. Or Karn comes in, immediately wishes for Tormod's Crypt. Now Reanimate is done, and Tamiyo's clues don't work. This deck is, and even if you do jam on it, okay, like Atraxa's in, you got some cards, one of them's Force of Will. This deck is built to grind through Force of Wills anyway. You force, you hit them for 7, and then they kill you on the following turn, and they don't care about that 14 life swing along the way. This is just a really well-constructed deck at not caring about any of the things Reanimator's doing.
I played this deck, I think yesterday for a video, and I think my opponent put in some Reanimator nonsense or some show and tell nonsense or something like that, and I knew they had a Force of Will. So it's like, okay, I have 8 mana. I will cast a 4 mana must counter card as bait, resolve a second 4 mana must counter card, and it didn't matter that you did your thing. And there's a lot of scenarios like that where it's like, okay, you did your thing. Now I have Ensnaring Bridge in play. And like, that is enough. Or, okay, you did your thing, but I'm going to put up some shields, and a turn or 2 later, I Kozilek's Command your giant creature out of play because you can actually get to that amount of mana with a couple of Urza's Towers or Urza's Workshops. Or sometimes you just win over it. You tutor up your Paradox Engine and you just fully combo off and kill your opponent with their Atraxa in play.
Yeah, Karn Ensnaring Bridge is extremely well positioned right now. That whole list of decks we just talked about, Reanimator, Red Stompy, Izzet Delver, Dimir Tempo, all of those, of the top 5 decks, it's the 4 decks that aren't Mystic Forge combo are pretty bad versus Ensnaring Bridge. And that assumes that they have gotten you to a point where you even need to Ensnaring Bridge instead of just winning with that card instead.
So I don't believe we've actually said what this new exciting Tezzeret is. Should we read it?
First, let's talk about Moxfield.com, the best deck building website that there is and ever has been.
Did you know that you can use Moxfield.com and Scryfall together to create deck lists super easily? And you can just say, ooh, I like this card. I'm going to put it into my deck, and literally just drag it into Moxfield, and then the card is in your deck. Because that's how I built my most recent Commander deck, and it was the greatest, and I love it so much.
Cross-website click and drag compatibility is bonkers. They're doing awesome stuff over there.
Tezzeret Cruel Captain. For 3 generic mana, you have a legendary Planeswalker, Tezzeret. Whenever another artifact you control enters, put a loyalty counter on Tezzeret. 0 mana, untap target artifact or creature. If it's an artifact creature, put a +1/+1 counter on it. -3, search your library for an artifact card with a mana value of 1 or less, reveal it, put it to your hand, and then shuffle. -7, you get an emblem with, at the beginning of combat on your turn, put 3 +1/+1 counters on target artifact you control. If it's not a creature, it becomes a 0/0 robot artifact creature. And it has 4 loyalty.
Yeah, so it has 4 loyalty in the biggest possible fucking air quotes, because so frequently you will play this out and then vomit some stuff out afterwards, and its starting loyalty is often closer to 6.
Right, and I have not played with this card in Legacy yet, but I have played with it in Vintage, where all of Magic's most powerful 0-drop artifacts live. And like turn 1 Tezzeret, tutor Black Lotus, play Lotus, Tezzeret ticks back up is pretty common. Or even like tutor Mox Sapphire, Tezzeret goes up, Ancestral Self, another Mox, and then Tezzeret can tutor again on the very next turn already. This card is very good in the decks that want it, and I am not sure. There was a lot of buzz on social media in the Vintage world that Tezzeret was going to break it. Was going to break Vintage, automatically restricted. Watch out, everyone, here it comes. I don't think that is true, but I think that there are a lot of cool things you can do with it.
So when I conceptually looked at this card, I looked at the -7 ability and I went, this is very powerful. This is something that can take over the game. This is something that can grind a control deck to oblivion. And while that's all true, I think the -7 ability is very close to flavor text. I played a league where I crushed it. I went 4-1, and I never activated that -7 ability a single time because my opponents were just dead before that became relevant. The mode that's good is the 0 mana ability to just untap your 1 ring. And having this be a manifold key / voltaic key effect that also can tutor for your Pithing Needle to stop wastelands, or your Graveyard Hate, or get Mox Opal so you can make another play the same turn. Those 2 top abilities are the ones that actually matter.
Right. There's one important case where the -7 is a big deal, and that's when you've been null rodded. And that gives you an endless stream of attackers through null rod. And Tezzeret's loyalty up ability, the trigger when an artifact enters, doesn't ask your artifacts to do anything except exist, which is, it might not come up in 5 games, it might not come up in 10, but if you play 50 or 100 games with this, you're going to beat a handful of null rods with this ultimate ability as well.
I'm glad you touched upon that, Brian, because I've been grinding Legacy Leagues with Storm recently, and the number of null rods out of decks has just drastically gone up over the last week or so, and it's very clearly people trying to beat Karn Forge or Mystic Forge combo, whatever you would like to call it, and I think Forge getting a built-in answer to winning through null rod is the biggest thing that's happened to the deck in a very long time.
I think blue players should be packing consigns. I think Consign to Memory is incredible, assuming that you can afford to leave up the 1 mana turn after turn. You won't have to leave it open for long because this deck is going to throw threat after threat after threat at you. But I think Consign is the premium card now.
Phil, I promise we are. We've been packing Consign since that card was printed in every sideboard, in every format where it's legal. You don't need to worry about Consign staying home. It's just how many null rods or deafening silences or collector oofs or what else is backing up the consigns, because one or the other is not enough.
I remember right after the ban, I played Mystic Forge combo, and people were like, what are we going to replace Vexing Bauble with? And the default answer was Defense Grid, because you wanted to make sure one of your large spells are resolved. If you look at these current lists, they're like, LOL Defense Grid, I'm just going to throw Haymakers until my opponent's dead. Like, it's clearly just them punching the ground until the ground is dead, because there's no protection in this list. It's just big dumb card after big dumb card. Obviously there's some skill to winning the game. I'm not trying to say that there's none, but when you look at the deck, it's just, I'm going to throw punches and eventually you're not going to have enough forces. Like, there's no real game plan other than that. And I think that it's kind of awesome.
There's also an important innovation that happened, which is Disruptor Flute. I think we all knew that was Pithing Needle, but I think it took a while for the Meddling Mage half of that to sink into the consciousness of deck building, because there's not a defense grid in any of the lists I'm looking at, but there are 2 to 4 Disruptor Flutes, and you could just name Consign or Force of Will with that, like end step, check them. There's some sub-game, some cat and mouse to figure out which thing you need to name, but if your opponent like taps out for Nethergoyf because they have Force of Will, then you just name Force of Will. It's the only thing they could have there. Then you untap and win. And what are they going to do? Force the Flute? So Disruptor Flute, doing double duty, turning off enemy things like Wasteland, or turning off that Force of Will or that Consign in their hand. I think there is sneaky defense grid still in the deck. It's just called Disruptor Flute now.
And on the note of Disruptor Flute has gotten worse against this deck. It used to be that if you wanted to play it out proactively, say because you needed to tap out for something on your next turn, you had the 50-50 shot of Karn the Great Creator or the One Ring. Well, now it's a 33%er because Tezzeret Cruel Captain is in there as well. And while it is maybe the least scary of those 3 cards, it will still just win the game if you leave it there. And it untapping a Grim Monolith can often just enable some bullshit with Kozilek's Command.
So I have an opinion on the best way to beat this deck. And I think it's that you need to trip it up on mana. The deck, if you allow it to have mana, is so good at just continuing to throw punches. But if you Force of Will a Grim Monolith, the deck really stumbles. Like, yeah, you have Urza's Tower plus Planar Nexus that makes 4 mana on turn 2. But if you cut them off Grim Monolith, it really slows down the deck because they have the Tezzeret to untap the Grim Monolith. They have all the keys, all these things that work really well. But if you just take it away, they have to play a more fair game plan, slowly accruing value with the Glaring Fleshraker, or they have to assemble their lands. And if you're a Wasteland deck, you can cut off the Urza's Tower Planar Nexus combo anyway. So I think if you go after the mana, you're more likely to be successful than trying to always hit their top end.
I also think it's right, if you're a fair deck, to pack your removal for Fleshraker. For a long time, I would try to like board down to 2 Swords to Plowshares because they really only have 4 targets for it in the whole deck, and they're not going to draw all 4, and I just want 1 plow so I don't have to force the Fleshraker. But now I think I'm like, leave all 4 plows in, because not only do they have the Fleshraker, but they have the Urza Saga constructs that might become a problem. And even if they don't have the Saga, killing the Fleshraker when you can kill it, rather than spending a precious counterspell on it, is a really big deal. That's worth a lot of mana to them, and it's frequently their primary win con. So I think attacking the mana and leaving in enough removal to reliably kill Fleshraker and save your counterspells on that is part of the package to deal with this.
Another thing that I just found is the Tezzeret Cruel Captain says value 1 or less. This means that you could search out Portable Hole to remove a Null Rod. So your deck has more ways of beating Null Rod than it ever has before, or a Collector Oof or whatever. Maybe everyone else has already noticed this, but it just dawned on me, and that's a pretty big difference maker too. So you have the ultimate to win the game, but you can also just go, okay, -3, answer Null Rod, kill you.
Yeah, Tezzeret is Trinket Mage. It's not Urza Saga. That ability, you could get things like Portable Hole. These lists are not doing it, but you can get things like Darksteel Citadel or Seat of the Synod with Tezzeret minus as well. There's options. You could get Lotus Bloom. I don't know what we're doing with it, but Unlike Urza Saga, you could tutor that up.
And the tutor board occasionally has some weird stuff in it. The list I played had Perilous Snare, which is essentially an artifact Oblivion Ring that technically has some other text on it if you get max speed, but that didn't come up at all.
Yeah, that's just an Oblivion Ring you can get with Karn. Tezzeret's crazy in Vintage, though. I mentioned that it's not going to break the format necessarily like some people thought it might, but much has been said in our Legacy section here about untapping the One Ring. How about untapping Time Vault? That's already just the core of many Vintage decks. That is the payoff for a lot of Vintage combo decks. And Tezzeret just gives you a bunch of ways to do it. I played a list yesterday. It recorded for the channel. Just pulling this up real quick. I'm unprepared. So this list, this Vintage deck, it's Dimir Paradoxical Outcome. I actually think Esper is a lot more interesting, but I decided to go with the basics first. There's 4 Tezzeret. Tezzeret can tutor Manifold Key if you need to. There is also, the one Manifold Key itself. There is Urza Saga that can get Manifold Key. There is Tinker, Demonic Tutor, and Vamp Tutor that can get Time Vault or Tezzeret. This is so many lines to just that tight little package. And when Tezzeret's in the deck anyway, and like I mentioned a second ago, just dropping out a Tezzeret, if you're like land Mana Crypt Tezzeret, and then tutor Mock Sapphire or Black Lotus or Vexing Bauble, Sensei's Top, Soul Ring, you could basically do whatever you want with that thing at that point. And then there's so many artifacts built into the Vintage mana base that Tezzeret's likely to be able to tutor another artifact on the very next turn. And in a list like Paradoxical Outcome, you could tutor a 0 mana artifact, PO, picking up all the artifacts and Tezzeret, replay Tezzeret, who could tutor again, dump out all the artifacts from the PO, trigger Tezzeret up to the moon, and then pick them all up again. That came up a few times. This stuff is crazy. And I'm actually really interested in exploring Esper in this space, because Esper gives you the portable hole, like Bryant mentioned, that can solve a lot of null rod problems. But Esper also gives you Oswald Fiddlebender, who Tezzeret can tutor 1-drops. Oswald can flip the 1-drop into Time Vault, and then the Tezzeret is there to untap the Time Vault. Like, that feels like a package that has enough combo control angles to really get it done.
So, Brian, I know that we've already done our ad for Moxfield, but I didn't want to sit here and listen to you talk about the deck. So what I did was I went to moxfield.com, I follow you, and I just opened up the deck list while you were describing it.
I'm also on my Moxfield.
Exactly. Like, I knew that I could see it if I just went to your Moxfield. So we've already done the ad. This is me just appreciating being able to find Brian's deck list in instant speed. Like, I didn't have to wait for him to describe it. I was just looking at it the whole time.
Yep. And the big problem with Tezzeret, if there is one in Vintage, is that it is incompatible with the most broken Magic card ever printed, which is Lurrus of the Dream Den, which is one of the things that defines all the best decks in Vintage. And currently the default way to build Paradoxical Outcome and various Time Vault combo decks is with Lurrus as your companion. So to even start including Tezzeret in your deck, you have to rule out Lurrus just at the start before you even tune a single other slot. And that's a significant cost to get this guy in. So he has to clear not only the bar of being sweet when he's in play, which is obviously just true, but you have to not play Lurrus to get there, which does also unlock Tinker for Bolas' Citadel, something that's largely fallen off in the format because Lurrus is just better than Bolas' Citadel. And if Lurrus is better than Bolas' Citadel, is Tezzeret then better than Lurrus? I'm skeptical of the opportunity cost of Tez in Vintage, but obviously there's a lot of exciting text on this card and it will be explored.
Yeah, but you get to play Tinker, which is the best thing about Vintage, and Lurrus doesn't let you do that, so F Lurrus.
Yeah, Tinker is the nuts. Like, we did that episode a few episodes back about our favorite things about Magic and our top 5 favorite cards. We know Tinker is my actual favorite Magic card of all time. So I'm rooting for Tezzeret selfishly, so I get to play Tinker.
All right, I'm going to fork back to Legacy for just 1 second here. In kind of wrapping up our discussion on Tezzeret Cruel Captain, I want to point out that it is pretty reasonable in a Painter shell as well. Painter used to be a 4x Grindstone deck, and then Urza Saga came out, and it often dropped down to about a 2x Grindstone deck. There was a 8-1 deck list from the August 2nd challenge by Zana Zero that ran 3 painters, 1 grindstone, 4 Tezzeret Cruel Captains to help tutor it up. And that is just another deck that is very capable of absolutely crapping artifacts everywhere and like being a 1-ring deck and having all of those Tezzeret synergies. But you also then have the silver bullet of, oh, Tezzeret gets to tutor my 1 grindstone. That is my oops, I win button.
Phil, last week I got paired against somebody on Mono White Painter, and I just assumed it was one of the decks you played on your channel. Like, it actually just was Mono White Painter. They had, like, Oswald Fiddlebender, they had Tezzeret, all this stuff. I was like, oh, this is some Phil deck. That's what I thought in my head. I was like, Phil must have played this. So the fact that you're talking about it just makes it a little bit better in my head canon.
I have fiddled many an Oswald, shall we say.
Batman could not beat that confession out of me. Let's take a break, and then we'll talk about the other cards in Edge of Eternities.
All right, welcome back. While I think Tezzeret Cruel Captain is the kind of big winner of Edge of Eternities as far as Eternal formats go, I think there's about 5 other cards that should at the very least be on your radar. And I'm going to go out of order because I can. I want to talk about Pinnacle Emissary first. So this is a 1 colorless, 1 blue, 1 red, 3/3 robot. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 1/1 colorless drone artifact creature token with flying, and this token can block only creatures with flying.
Yeah, this card is just Empty the Warrens.
If that was it, the card would not be playable. But it has a warp cost for either a blue or a red. You may cast this card from your hand for its warp cost. Exile this creature at the beginning of your next end step, and then you may cast it from exile on a later turn. And Bryant is 100% right. This is the Empty the Warrens you cast at the beginning of your turn, and then you just go bobble, 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 bobble. I have a small army. I'm going to cycle all of those cards, and on turn 3 later, I can play this and do it again.
Yeah, that one is pretty sweet. We've seen cards like Psy Master Thopterist or Sahili, the 3-mana version for More of the Spark. We've seen those pop up here and there in 8-cast style decks or as combo engines in Vintage Cube. They tend to come up. Constructed has kind of passed them, but we can see if the Vintage Cubers out there know that these things do enable some busted stuff. This card was not on our list to talk about, but I'll just shoehorn it in while we're talking about having lots of artifacts. Miminon, the Right Hand. It's a legendary jellyfish advisor for 3 blue, 3/4 flying. You can look at the top card of your library anytime. You can cast artifact spells from the top of your library, and artifacts you control have tap, add a blue, spend this mana only to cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand. This is kind of like Urza. It gives you that Tolarian Academy type of juice. It is a mana more than Urza, and there's a restriction on the mana, but it does come with some additional card advantage. If your deck is just a bunch of 0 and 1 mana artifacts, it is not hard to shred through the whole thing. And cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand is really interesting. Like, that's Galvanic Relay, perhaps. Do we have anyone who likes that card in the chat? And if anyone in the chat likes that card, can you tell me how that card works alongside a ton of Baubles and Mox Opal? Like, is that a deck? Do those things go together, Bryant Cook?
It sounds familiar to me, like I might have played it before.
Right. I mean, obviously, resolving a 5-drop creature in a high power format and expecting it to stick around while you execute your combo is a lot to ask, but there might be something here. But the Pinnacle thing, what is it called? Pinnacle Emissary? That one actually has juice. Like, warping that down for 1 gives it a lot of action.
So you're right in comparing this to Psy because it is very similar. The thing that I realized immediately when I saw it was, unlike many of those other jukes, this one is an artifact, which means that if you mill it with Emery, you can just cast it from the graveyard. And that was a big deal. That was very, very threatening because a lot of times, you mill over your Psy or your Padim or whatever weird juke you have, and it just sits there in the graveyard. This one comes out And it is just a 3/3 body, which is respectable by Legacy standards.
Yeah, that being an artifact is a great call out. Also, it is an Izzet card, and a lot of the artifact Emery style decks have adopted Flame of Enor as a tool right now, as doing all the great things that card does, because Emery is a wizard, Tamiyo is just in most blue decks. Tamiyo quite good with Flame of Enor and Thoughtcast. Like that, we're in the right color spread for the things people are already doing, and there's a lot of potential to explore things that we aren't doing right now.
It's worth mentioning that the artifact drones also help you, I forget what it's called, convoke in the Kappa Cannoneer.
Oh yeah, Improvise?
Improvise.
There we go. I knew I was close. The card that I think is more exciting is Quantum Riddler for 3 blue, a creature Sphinx, a 4/6. When this creature enters, draw a card. As long as you have 1 or fewer cards in your hand, if you would draw 1 or more cards, you draw that many cards plus 1 instead, and it has Warp for 1 and a blue. I've seen this card in Jeskai Control, I've seen it in Doomsday, I had a Sneak and Show opponent play it against me. This card is everywhere right now.
Roll that beautiful bean footage. This triggers up the beanstalk when you warp it, and when it comes back down. If you have no cards in your hand, like if this is the last card in your hand, you warp it down, you draw a card for Beanstalk, then it enters, then you draw 2. And the Beanstalk decks do tend to trade off early. Like they are spending their resources aggressively to get into that mid game where Beanstalk can start pulling ahead. Quantum Riddler, I have been in chats with Pokemoki about this card, and it's a little awkward because it is worse at killing your opponent than Murktide Regent and worse at drawing cards than something like Rakshasa's Bargain. However, it is a little of both. So what is the sum of the parts here when we're talking about trying to solve a bean shell? I think this card is way better than Triumph of St. Catherine if we're talking about traditional white-based bean decks.
What's weird about this card is I thought that it was 6 mana the first few times I played against it. And it wasn't until like the 3rd or 4th time where I was like, this card is 5 mana. Like I actually feel like the mana cost is a little bit pushed on this one. Maybe it's just because in my head I'm thinking of Consecrated Sphinx, and this is also a Sphinx, but 5 mana for this card feels like a steal.
Yeah, it's a mythic rare in standard. Cards got to be good these days.
All right, Bryant, help me out. I'm absolutely blanking on the pilot's name. Who is the person who is always playing the Killaby? Killaby, who has a knack for deck building around sort of strange combo decks, was in the leagues today testing out Quantum Riddler. And in that Riddlesmith shell that constantly wants to be looting with things like Artist's Talent and Riddlesmith, like this card really made the deck pop off quite hard.
Oh, that sounds great, combining Artist Talent with Quantum Riddler, because once you get to 0, every spell draws 2. That's just nuts.
I died on my turn 1 when I was on the play, when they threw in Leyline of Anticipation and just vomited cards everywhere until I got grape shotted to the face.
You love to see it. That's great.
Yeah, honestly, you do. You can't be mad.
All right, I'm going to tee up Phil for a card that's extremely Phil here. This is Frenzied Baloth. Green for a 3/2 beast. This spell can't be countered. Trample, haste. Creature spells you control can't be countered. Combat damage can't be prevented. Stat bomb. Phil, go.
That is a lot of words. So we already have Allosaurus Shepherd in Legacy, which is going to be easier to both cast and Green Sun for if you just want your stuff not to get countered. But this is all creature spells rather than your green spells, so that is a different effect. I actually think the most important line here is actually combat damage can't be prevented. Just think about how much of this episode we spent talking about the One Ring and how central the One Ring is to the Legacy experience right now, because it's not only in these Mystic Forge decks, but it's also in Moonstompy and a handful of other decks. A lot of times, those decks will stabilize on the edge, and they are expecting the One Ring to buy them a turn, and then you Green Sun for this, it comes in, and the creatures you already have in play now get to attack and actually kill your opponent instead of getting fogged.
Yeah, I lost a game this past weekend to an opponent. They were on White Stompy, and we were just in a pretty tight damage race, and they just played the One Ring on a turn. Never tapped it, never drew a card on it. They just needed to fog me once, and that was enough to turn the tide. And something like Frenzied Baloth, especially if you could tutor for it cheaply with a Zenith, could really break it open.
I remember back in my day, we had Troll Ascetic, and that was the 3/2 creature that green decks played that honestly defined Legacy for a long time. There was a red-green survival advantage deck where Troll Ascetic was the core of the whole strategy. And now you look at Frenzied Baloth, or at least I do, and Phil, I'm not trying to offend you here, I question if this card's actually playable. And it's so pushed if you compared this to something like a Troll Ascetic or whatever. It's just, what deck out there really wants Frenzied Baloth? Like, I guess you could argue like maybe the Nadu combo decks, but there is no green aggro deck in Legacy anymore. So, like, you could argue Maverick, but Maverick is a creature toolbox deck. It's not really an aggro deck. So I just think the odd part about this card is that it doesn't really have a home.
That I agree with.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I played against this the day that Edge of Eternities went live. I was playing against Crucible of Worlds, just paired into them on a random league, and they were doing some Nick Fit Greater Gargadon Green Sun Zenith kind of stuff where making the Gargadon uncounterable and bashing in seemed to be the plan. And I just picked that deck apart with Fatal Push on the Baloth in response to the spell. Now the spell is counterable. Baloth does just die to everything. It's also smaller than everything. 3/2 looks big until you realize that that's just a Corey Steelcutter Monk can trade off with that. It's smaller than Nethergoyf, basically, 100% of the time. This looks like something that belongs in a deck that would have been good 8 years ago, I think is how I would like to describe this.
So there's another neat 2-mana creature in the form of Cosmogoyf. This is black and a green for a Tarmogoyf style card. It's Elemental Lurgoyf with power and toughness equal to the number of cards you own in exile, and its toughness is equal to that number +1.
Speaking of cards that would have been good 8 years ago, this is the type of card that people would have loved 8 years ago. They would have been like, ooh, I have my Relic of Progenitus in play. I'll target myself on your end step. Like, you just don't get to do those sort of cute things anymore. Earlier, we were talking about the main deck Soul Guide Lantern in decks like Mystic Forge combo or in Moon Stompy, and I couldn't help but think, is Relic of Progenitus better? I mean, it's probably not, but it's a thought that I had, but I also can't remember the last time anyone played a Relic of Progenitus not in Pauper.
So I recorded with Cosmogoyf Relic of Progenitus today, actually.
Yes!
And I sat there and I was like, can I really justify playing Relic of Progenitus over like Spellbomb? And I was like, I need to exile my own graveyard. I need to stop my opponent's graveyard. This is the right card to play. But Bryant is absolutely right. You don't get to fuck around like that anymore. This body does not have any evasion. This body does not have any haste. I had multiple, I think like 21 Cosmogoyfs on turn 2. And I did not win any games where that happened. Not a single one.
Oh, well, that's pretty cool. You can use like Serum Powder to like start it off at 7. I like that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is exactly what I was doing with Slime Against Humanity as the other thing that had synergy with Serum Powder. And let me tell you, that card also does not produce tokens with any form of evasion. Chump blockers were eaten good in this league. Although those ones have trample.
Yeah, this conversation, there's two things you can do with Cosmogoyf. One is try to combo with cards like Serum Powder to jumpstart it, or even the Destiny Idiot, the big Eldrazi who exiles 3 cards when you start the game, but then you have to have that card in your deck. You could do like Spoils of the Vault, or in higher power formats, a Demonic Consultation for the one shot, or you could just play like Gurmag Angler and work your way up, escape a Cling to Dust, you're there, and you kind of earn it on the slow. You could also play a deck that incentivizes your opponent to attack your graveyard. We've seen Witherbloom combo come out of the sideboard in some Turbo Reanimator decks, like Cosmogoyf costs the same thing as Witherbloom Apprentice, and your opponent leads on a Leyline of the Void, and off you go with your Cosmoglyphs. I don't know. You could like play it fair, which seems too slow for Legacy, or you could play it unfair, which seems too janky for Legacy. I don't think this one's going to have a home. I wish it had trample, and then maybe we could talk. But being blocked multiple turns in a row by Orcish Bowmaster, even if it does have 25 power, is tough.
I'm on the hook for attempting one more Cosmoglyph League. So the Serum Powder route was real bad. And next I am going to try a Tempo Doomsday shell, where I can just Doomsday my library away, and now these Glyphs are huge. And if that doesn't work, like, oops, I will Thassa's Oracle on my last turn anyway.
Yeah, Bug Doomsday with this thing sounds like the way to do it. Murktide Regent in the original Tempo Doomsday from a couple years ago, when you Doomsday with a full graveyard, Murktide Regent sees those cards go away. That's kind of the same thing, but you could curve Cosmoglyph into Doomsday and then solve both these problems. That's pretty sweet.
Honestly, I want to try Cosmoglyph Doomsday. That sounds awesome.
Yep, I also have somebody asking me to play Cosmoglyph, and I'm excited to do it. I just don't think it's going to be a meta breaker.
So, Brian, you mentioned Spoils of the Vault. There's a 100% chance that this episode now hits the Doomsday Discord, and they all start talking about how great Spoils of the Vault is. That entire community loves that card.
There's a running meme on my channel that anyone who casts Spoils of the Vault dies immediately on my channel. I played some combo deck that had it as like a one of, and I think I died to it from 18 to 20 life every time I cast it in that league. And then a couple times since then, I've played against it, and in both Modern and Legacy. And every time it's cast, I just say like, well, they're going to die. And then Moto takes a moment to load, and then my opponent's at -3, and then I'm laughing really hard. That card is not good. Though I have signed one in real life. A Doomsday player who I played against, who actually made a really deep run at Eternal Weekend, he cut one of the Ponders in his deck for a one of Spoils of the Vault, so he had me sign his 3 Ponders and the Spoils.
That's great.
The last card we have to talk about is Cryogen Relic. It's more of a Pauper card than a Legacy card, in my opinion. For 1 in a blue, 2 mana total for an artifact. When this artifact enters or leaves the battlefield, draw a card, which means that if you were to pick it up with a Core Skyfisher or Paradoxical Outcome, you'll draw the card when it leaves. So unlike something like Ichor Wellspring, which is when it dies or goes to the graveyard, you draw a card, this is when it leaves. And then it has an activated ability of 1 in a blue, so 2 mana total. Sacrifice this artifact, put a stun counter on up to 1 target tapped creature. The creature has to be tapped already. I've seen some really sweet affinity decks in Pauper going 4 colors for this card, and then playing Core Skyfisher, but also Glint Skyhawk, I think it's called.
Glinthawk.
Glinthawk? Okay. But seeing those like really sweet 4-color affinity decks, like that's what I love about Pauper, is like people doing just like value plays that make the game go longer. I think like just like the bum rush mono red stuff got really, really boring to me, and seeing the return of decks like 5 years ago that it's just like, how am I going to bounce my Astrolabe 20 times and win this game? Seeing that again is kind of refreshing. And like Cryogen Relic is like the new Astrolabe.
Right, and Ichor Wellspring is a Pauper staple, and Cryogen Relic is better. It's obviously harder to cast. It's not strictly better. You need blue mana, but leaves the battlefield versus dies is such a change, such an upgrade. It's doing a lot of work. And though we do expect to see this in Pauper more than anywhere else, I did play against it in Legacy already, and it was in blue-white, maybe Esper Felia core. Like Felia gets this thing going.
Ooh.
Yeah, Phil just his shorts got shorter, and I played against that deck on the first day Edge of Eternities came out, and we actually had a really sweet game. I believe I won the match, but the game that my opponent won, they chained together 3 Cryogen Relics and then actually used each one to freeze a Netherglyph turn after turn after turn as they ground back from behind, and then they were ahead by the time my Netherglyph woke up. And they were +6 cards from all their relics. It was pretty sweet. And it pitches to Force of Will.
Yeah, I wonder if you can like do this in a Yorion shell where you threaten to just draw infinity cards come endgame.
Yeah, it's like an Up the Beanstalk for babies.